Welcome to the Resurrection Church podcast. We're glad you're joining us. My name's Bradley. If you don't know who I am, and I'm one of the pastors at Resurrection Church here in Greer, South Carolina, and I'm joined by...
I'm Cody. I'm the deacon of podcasts, the esteemed parliamentarian, and I guess we're about to tack on deacon of politics.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely more informed than the average bear on these things.
A little bit of a nerd with everything. So.
Yeah. You enjoy it, politics?
That depends on how you define things. All right, I'll say this. One of the great things about our current moment is it does provide really good memes. So you can at least get a laugh out of it.
Yeah.
But in terms of the enjoyment, I've always enjoyed debating ideas, discussing ideas, what's best for people, that kind of stuff. So in that sense, yeah, I absolutely enjoy it.
Yeah.
When we get into screechy talking heads yelling at each other on TV, I don't enjoy that part.
Yeah.
That's dumb.
I think that, like, I could see a world where I do enjoy politics and fascinated by it in some ways. I think over the last, I don't know, probably the last 20 years, I've become increasingly disillusioned with it and have had this ongoing sort of, or really ever increasing feeling that I just don't have time to deal with all that mess.
Right.
Because it feels like an absolute mess most of the time. And, as a Christian, as a pastor, I felt like I've got better things to do, and I'll show up and vote, try to be informed when I vote. I'll certainly, say the Pledge of Allegiance when I'm at a football game and sing the national anthem and support our troops and show gratitude to them and all those things, right? Basic patriotism, if you will. But it's been hard for me to be super patriotic and to be really, really attentive to all of the rhetoric, and the increasing division too is made it incredibly difficult. We definitely are at a time where it's hard in most contexts to have a fruitful conversation about things that do matter.
Right.
So this podcast, I'm not entirely sure where all we're going to go, and certainly where we're going to end up.
There's a lot of directions, and there's a lot of material to cover. So however many of these we need to do, we can do.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with kind of what prompted me to come to you and say, hey, let's talk about this on a podcast, was Charlie Kirk's funeral, which in many ways was absolutely amazing. Regardless of how some might feel about him and what he did, what Turning Point is, and what he was doing with Turning Point, showing up on college campuses, holding debates, and then at the same time being what seems to be a genuine believer in Jesus and lover of Jesus and proclaimer of the gospel. Like, in my opinion, those things are undeniable about him.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things about that weekend, providentially, we did not go to this, but Kristen and I were on vacation in Phoenix and Sedona while that was going on. So we swung by the TPUSA headquarters just to see what kind of makeshift memorials they had, and it was a lot. Yeah. It was overwhelming, and it was very Christian how they handled it. And there were like 200 people there the Friday before the funeral, just at 10 a.m. on Friday. Wow. But then that weekend we spent in Sedona, and the day of his funeral, Sedona is, for those who don't know, Sedona is a very strange place. It's like the woo-woo new age capital of the world. Obviously, we weren't there to go buy crystals. Like, it's even so woo-woo that at the hotel, they were like, hey, if you want a good view of the mountains or whatever, eat at this restaurant. And by the way, that's by one of the vortexes and whatever, like weird stuff up there. But even up there were multiple people wearing the freedom shirts. Multiple. and various Christian shirts and stuff like that. And so there's something going on with that. You know, you're right that there was a lot of good in that funeral service.
Well, here's what I want to start with. I had so many takeaways from that funeral that were positive.
Yeah.
And that's putting it mildly.
Yeah.
Very positive.
Especially Erica Kirk's speech.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that. But I had one concern, one primary concern, and that's really the impetus for this podcast. Let's start with the positives. I mean, regardless of how you feel about some of those who led the worship, ergo the likes of Brandon Lake and whatever, Phil Wickham, what's her name? I've lost her.
Carrie
Job, her husband, connections with Bethel there, all of that. Regardless of how you feel about it, the songs that I heard sung, good songs. Like, I mean, they were, at one point they were singing Holy, and there were, lots of hallelujahs and really, really good songs, songs that I think are God exalting songs. So I love the worship. I love the fact that how many people were there? Like,
it was over 100,000 in the building.
Yeah. And some, 100 or 200,000 that were in some sort of overflow. I don't know.
Yeah.
But all those people singing, and then all of the talk speeches that happened, I didn't hear any talk of the gospel that I went, nope.
Right.
Like where someone proclaimed the God. I mean, Donald Trump Jr., but
there were a couple where it was like, I don't think I would have said it that way.
Right. But I, for the most part, I felt like it was really, the gospel was accurately represented in so many ways. And you mentioned Erica Kirk. I mean, like, to stand up there and proclaim her forgiveness of her husband's killer. That's just amazing, and it felt so genuine to me. The emotion that she did not hold back when she said, "I forgive him," was as painful as it was. It was beautiful, and then I felt like she gave one of the best descriptions and really a call to a God glorifying complementarian marriage.
Oh yeah,
that I've ever heard.
Yeah,
and I mean, I've read all and listened to all the heavy hitters in the church, who promote, rightly so in my opinion, a complementarian view of marriage. I felt like hers was maybe the best I've ever heard.
Yeah.
It was so good, and it was so rich. The way she challenged husbands and challenged wives, and talked about the role of the wife and mother in the home without it in any way, in my opinion, sounding like it was less than the role of the husband and father. And so I just felt like that was all so good, and I want to celebrate that. I want to celebrate the gospel proclamation that I've said this, that might have been the single largest captive audience to the gospel at one time in human history. When you factor in all the people that not only were there, but watched it online.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
100 million within the first day.
That's just amazing.
It's probably at a couple billion by this point.
I mean, you think about Pentecost and 3,000 were saved. We don't know how many total were there. Jesus probably had upwards of 20,000 that were listening to him when he, was teaching before he did the miracle feeding. That may have been the largest captive audience in human history. That is something I think Christians should celebrate. I could not fathom any Christian feeling negative about that.
You have my brain going down a rabbit hole that I'm going to resist right now. But
Well, the rabbit hole's going to come.
Yeah.
Here's my one concern. All right. My one concern, and I think it's a big one, and it doesn't negate all of the good that has come and will continue to come from what's happened with Charlie Kirk. Is the mixture of political grandstanding that was interwoven into that service that went on for like 4 or 5 hours. Most vividly seen in that when Erica Kirk finished, such a wonderful talk from her. Donald Trump comes up right after it with pyrotechnics and Lee Greenwood singing "I'm proud to be an American," and he takes, with whatever good he might have said during his time, takes the opportunity to talk about some big announcement he's going to make about, some connection to autism and modern medicine. And I honestly did not, I couldn't stomach the thought of listening to him after listening to her. Right.
Yeah.
And this is not like,
you're not just trashing Trump.
I'm not trashing Trump. I'm just talking about the context.
Right.
And my concern stemming from that is that Christians in particular, and I think the broader scope of America, being able to distinguish between the political grandstanding and the proclamation of the gospel. I think the God and country thing is a net negative.
Right.
I think that, Jesus talked about relativized affections. And he used hyperbole to make that point.
Yep.
For example, if anyone would come after me, he must hate his father, mother, brothers, sisters, even his children, even his own life, or he can't be my disciple. What is that? That's hyperbole to talk about relativized affections, that our affection for him is so great that all other affections are in such a distant second that it almost looks like hate by comparison.
Right.
For him to say, he who wants to save his life will lose it, but he who hates his life in this world will keep it for eternity.
Yep.
That's a hyperbole to, I don't think we're, supposed to hate everything about our life and this existence, but our longing for his kingdom and eternal life is to be so great, and our affection for his kingdom so great, that our love for this world and everything in it and all other lesser affections they pale by comparison so much that we would rightly say, I'm a stranger and alien here. And so how do we think about that? Like, how do we not make the mistake of letting our affection for America, conservative values, which I think are good things. Like I am pro-America.
Right.
I am pro-conservative values, politically, morally, so on and so forth. How do we not let those affections creep up to the point that they would effectively drag our affection for Christ and his kingdom down?
Right.
That's my one concern.
Right. One of the interesting things with Trump's speech at Charlie Kirk's funeral was, yes, a lot of the stuff that he said with the autism announcement, and like, I saw very, very, very few people actually okay with that. Most people are like, dude, what are you doing?
Yeah.
But there was one clip where, and of course we have to like have the caveat of Trump is we'll just say an interesting communicator. Just the way he says things is so unconventional, but he was technically right, even though a lot of people kind of freaked out about one thing he said about Charlie Kirk loving his enemies, right? Erica Kirk talking about, he wanted to save these young men from, the predations of, terrible worldviews, whatever. And Trump was like, he loved his enemies and I'm not there.
He's like, I disagreed with you.
I disagreed with him. I want the worst for my enemies. I want to crush them, stuff like that. And he was doing that to make a contrast of Charlie Kirk was a really good guy.
Yeah.
But also,
and it could have been a little tongue in cheek,
and absolutely, and
although,
and we're talking about Trump, and at the same time, per Romans 13, the government is supposed to be a terror to those who do wrong, and so in that sense, if we're talking about Charlie Kirk's enemies and the guy who shot him, I think it would be right for a for someone in the civil government to come in and say, "Hey, we're gonna do some justice here," right?
Yeah.
And comfort, and Erica Kirk came back out at some point, and Trump gives her a hug, and I thought that was really good. And so if we look at it from that angle, granting the intricacies of dealing with Donald Trump as a communicator, I thought that part was good. I totally disagree with the weird stuff.
But Trump is not, when he says "I hate my enemies," as opposed to Charlie Kirk, who maybe exemplified love for enemies.
Right.
Trump is not talking just about those who commit moral evil.
Of course.
Which is the biblical context for the role of government.
Right.
He's talking about those who just oppose his views.
Right.
Right.
And if he means it that way, then
oppose his policy.
Mr. President, get it together.
Exactly. But I think his track record proves
right
that he is not only concerned about and we best acknowledge that I think politics have gotten more theological in a sense.
Finish your thought. I've thought about that.
Yeah, policies. I guess it's hard to have a policy without moral implications for that policy on either side.
Yep.
But at least when it comes to forget the economy stuff for a minute, and how we think about all of that. Mm-hmm. Even how we think about the wars going on overseas and what our government is doing to try to, resolve those conflicts or make them worse, depending on how you see it. Mm-hmm. When it comes to stuff like transgender, sexual identity, gender ideology, I would even argue things like, critical race theory and other things like that. These kinds of things have not only political implications, but theological implications, spiritual implications. Mm-hmm. So I think that, it's difficult to separate. Mm-hmm. And I am of the mind, and this is something that you might feel different. We could even, talk about this, not a debate, but to me, it feels more like a wrestling that's going on with me right now, is that I think that separation is important. Yeah. To be able to distinguish between, and I think Charlie Kirk did this. Mm-hmm. Like if you go and listen, watch some of his debates on college campuses, he was adamant about the fact that his conservative policies could stand on their own. Mm-hmm. Yes, they're informed by his convictions as a Christian. His policies flow from that, but he was not a proponent of, in order to be a true conservative, you have to be a Christian. He actually promoted the idea you could be a conservative even if you don't believe in Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. And I think that distinction's important.
To some extent, I would actually say that, yes, to be a true conservative means that you would be a Christian, because then you're recognizing that limited government it works because people are limited, because God is not limited, right?
Exactly.
And so in terms of, can you be conservative and not be Christian? Well, yes, but it is informed by Christianity, by the Bible.
Well, yeah, but what he was saying is that you don't have to convert to Christianity to see the merit and value of conservative policies.
Sure, but
conservative ideology.
It's a lot easier if you do, though.
No doubt. And I think Charlie Kirk would say that.
Yeah.
But one video in particular, I saw him talking to somebody who was, it was clearly a man dressed up as a woman.
Right.
And the first question it asked was, "Are you a Christian, Charlie Kirk?" And he immediately said, "Yes, but I can defend my conservative policies on their own, even though they're informed by my Christian faith." Mm-hmm. In other words, he was not. I even saw a video where he scolded someone who was saying that homosexual. I think it was a professing Christian who took the mic and said homosexuals have no place in the conservative movement, and he actually scolded them for that.
And I would disagree with Charlie Kirk on that, because homosexuality by definition is not conservative in the slightest.
Perhaps, but what I think Charlie Kirk was trying to make room for was debate within the conservative
Right, he was trying to make a Big Ten.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And that, I think
he knew what time it was.
Yeah.
Right. He knew in terms of elections and ideologies where the arguments are, and for the time being, you need some more co-belligerents to vote. And so in that way, okay, fine. While recognizing there's nothing conservative about that.
Yeah.
So you asked the question about politics getting theological.
Yep.
And legitimately, I think it's always actually been that way. It's just whether we recognize it or not. And I think part of the issue is, particularly for about the last 100-ish, maybe a little more years, this secularist progressive experiment, most notably starting with the Woodrow Wilson administration, has been going on. Secularism being, so the word secular isn't a dirty word. It just means it doesn't have to do with church. That's really what it means. But secularism means that we're going to go about our society establishing rules for it with civil governance or whatever, business, what have you, without reference to any god or religion, period. And it's been a disaster. And so when it's gotten theological, it's because you actually have warring deities. With secular progressives, the way I've heard it said is, if there is no God above the state, then the state is God. And so we've come along and remembered and said, well, no, actually the state answers to someone. Where some people say, no, the state is the end-all, be-all. You get that left and right, but it's mostly on the left right now.
But that was what I was going to ask, is could the same thing not happen on the right?
Oh, absolutely.
It
absolutely has.
Because, freedom, I've heard it said, and this might be a bit of an oversimplification, but the Constitution advocated for freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. So the separation of church and state is not to say that there is nothing, no place for religion in public policy.
Yep, exactly.
But rather to say that the government is not going to force or legislate religious beliefs, which I think is the right thing.
Right.
The last thing we want is the church, and this is, kind of where my concern goes when I start running down this rabbit trail, is that I don't want even the Republican Party and the conservative movement to be getting its grubby hands on the church.
Right.
I think I'll say this and I'll let you respond.
Yep.
I think the right thing for Donald Trump at that funeral was to sit his butt down.
Sure.
I just don't. I think that was on the Lord's Day, and there was worship happening. If he took the mic, it should have been something where he would have said in some way or postured himself in some ways to communicate, this is not about me. This is not about the government.
Right.
This is about Charlie Kirk and about his wife, and this is about lauding his faith and the gospel. And I'm just here to support and step into the background. That was not that was not the time for him to turn it into a political rally.
Yeah, I would totally agree. So,
and I'm not trying to just speak negatively about Trump.
Right.
I think if anybody's around me, you can probably guess who I voted for. You can guess what I would vote for. Okay.
Right.
I just have this concern that the waters are going to get too muddy.
By all means. So the First Amendment is one of the most misunderstood pieces of the Constitution, right? And you summarized it well. It's Congress shall make no law regarding an establishment of religion. What it was meant to do was prevent the Congress from saying, all right, here is a taxpayer-funded Church of the United States.
Exactly.
Similar to the Church of England.
Yeah.
Interestingly, 9 of the 13 states at the ratification of the Constitution had official state-sponsored churches, which I'm not for, but
it was there.
But
Can't
it was
deny
there.
that.
It was there. And in all of the original state constitutions, there was a religious test for holding statewide office. It was like South Carolina, North Carolina, it was you cannot be an atheist and hold state office. It was some of them had you have to be part of this denomination. Others were you have to affirm something like the Nicene Creed or the Apostles' Creed. And I'm all for that. I'm all for that.
Yep.
Which would take some rejiggering of certain constitutional norms, and we're not anywhere close to that. But yes, the First Amendment was meant to keep the government out of the church, not the church out of the government.
Exactly. For the government to stay in its lane.
Right. Even, and granting John Adams was a Unitarian, he was not our brother, but he noted, I'm pretty sure it was Adams, that the Constitution was meant for a moral and religious people, and it's not suited for any other. If you don't have decent people as part of your populace, then that system isn't going to work. This representative form of government just doesn't work, which was a brilliant insight. There's so much that we can learn from those guys, even when they got it wrong. Like, I'm not a big Jefferson guy because he was more revolutionary.
Right.
And speaking as a Christian, we're reformers. We're not revolutionaries. We want to reform what's there, and we don't want to break it unless it's absolutely necessary, as opposed to like the French style of revolution where we're lopping people's heads off.
Yeah.
Not including parakeets, but let the reader understand.
So let's talk about Christian nationalism.
Let's.
I think, like, let's start with, I'm not sure I fully understand it, if I'm honest, because I think you talk to people, you bring that term up, and people have all kinds of views about what that means.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of highly charged emotional aspects to this based on, who you voted for and what you think about the other side and what have you. Go ahead.
What chapter in Acts is it where Christians were first called Christians? Was that in Antioch as well?
Yes. Chapter 13. Is that right?
That sounds right.
Yeah.
So, and that was meant as an insult. So is Christian nationalist.
Yes.
So I was doing a little poking around, and I re-stumbled upon a clip from Vodi Bakum, the late great.
Yep.
And he was like, I didn't even hear about the term Christian nationalism until people started pushing back on the woke, DEI, Black Lives Matter, and the people trying to defend those things didn't actually have an argument. So they just said Christian nationalist, and now it applies to anybody to the right of like Mitt Romney. So there's that. While at the same time, like I don't love the term, but if you're in any kind of political discourse with anyone to the left of Mitt Romney, someone who would agree with even like Bill Clinton at this point, or Nancy Pelosi, etc., you're going to be called a Christian nationalist. Like, it's just a thing.
And being called that, you're being called what? Someone who...
They would think that you're trying to institute what's depicted in The Handmaid's Tale and make women dress up like ketchup bottles. And so, I mean, that's pretty much what it comes down to. Now, some parties have said, I can work with that. Right. It's like the Moscow crowd has said, okay, we'll just run with it. Even though they don't love the term, if you're going to be called the term, they're going to try and define it. There are some who would, and I've interacted with some of these guys on X while recognizing that X isn't the real world. There are some who have outright said we need a Protestant Franco, as in like the dictator of Spain during the World War II and after years, which is... I think insanity, it's not biblical, etc. And then there are some, like Vodi, who, within that same clip, he's like, well, if you don't want Christian nationalism, what kind of nationalism do you want? Do you want secularist, Muslim, Hindu? Like, where do we want our standards to come from?
Well, and I think there's an answer to that biblically.
Sure.
I think that you look at, we've talked about this on some Westminster podcasts, maybe even on the Res podcast, is that there does seem to be an increasing move, not just in America, but globally, toward Christianity, toward spirituality.
Yep.
And I think within that, for the most part, Christianity. I mean, you see, like, on my son is a he's a music geek, and he tells me all the time about how Christian songs are at the top of the Billboard charts.
And I'm seeing gobs of guys in secular metal bands coming to faith.
Yeah.
It's
you
just
posted something about that recently.
Yeah.
I saw, I think my son sent me a reel, or, Corey Asbury and Forrest Frank have become friends.
Okay.
Regardless how you feel about those two.
Right.
Apparently, I don't know if it'll actually come to pass, but they are plotting to put together an alternative Super Bowl halftime show where they want to get a stadium and absolutely pack it out.
Interesting.
And do Christian music and worship as an alternative to watch. I don't even know who the guy is that's doing it this coming Super Bowl, but I've heard things. All that to say, like, when you talk about Christian nationalism, I think sometimes there is the thought and feeling by some that we're Christians and the church are being leveraged for political gain.
Sometimes.
Right? Like the grandstanding perhaps that took place at Charlie Kirk's funeral is what could be characterized as politicians on the right placating to their voter base.
Sure.
And that's concerning to me.
Yeah.
But biblically, this is a verse we've talked about before. 1 Timothy 2, Paul writes and says, "First of all, then, I urge that entreaties and prayers, petitions, and thanksgivings be made on behalf of all men." Okay? Verse 2, "For kings and all those who are in authority, so that we may lead a tranquil and quiet life in all godliness and dignity." Paul seems to be telling us to pray for those in authority, specifically for the purpose that they would leave us alone.
Yep.
And we could be about the business of the kingdom.
Yep.
And then he goes on in verse 3 and says, "This is good and acceptable in the sight of God our Savior, who desires all men to be saved and come to the knowledge of the truth." And we've talked about this, that when Paul says desires all men, what he's talking about there is all types of men. And in the context, the all types includes kings and those who are in authority.
Right.
So Paul seems to say, yes, pray that those who are in office or will take office will be saved people or become saved people.
Right.
For the specific purpose, not that they would legislate Christianity,
right,
mandate that people go to a Christian church,
right,
but they would leave the church alone,
right,
and let us be about the business.
And the best way for them to leave us alone is if they're one of us.
Is if they're one of us, which is why I say I think Donald Trump should have just stayed seated. Right. Let the church be the church.
Right.
And then what happens? Like, if Christian nationalism means that we're praying for and actually seeing more and more Christians serving in government, leaving the church alone to let the church be about the business of the kingdom.
Yep.
Yes, obviously advocating for policies that align with Christian values.
Yep.
But leaving the church alone so that the church can evangelize and disciple, and that leads to a nation like America becoming increasingly Christian,
like before,
in the sense that more and more individuals and families are coming to faith, being saved, and becoming part of the church, and the kingdom of God is growing. I mean, what Bible-believing Christian wouldn't be for that?
Right. And so there's there's so many things that we get into, but baseline, I think the absolute baseline is Romans 13 with a proper understanding, and that being the civil authorities are God's servant, right? And that word is deacon. So they answer to God as his deacon. So whether that was Joe Biden during his 4 years, it was Lindsey Graham, William Timmons with his office down the street, Donald Trump, J.D. Vance, etc. They are God's deacons to carry out his will. Well, what's his will? Specifically in Romans 13 is rulers are not a cause of fear for good behavior, but for evil. So they're punishing evil, they're rewarding good. And then the question becomes, what's good and evil? How do we know what that is? And so there are some Christian brothers, right? So granting that they're brothers who would say, no, they don't actually need to look at the Bible for that. They can just use wisdom. But how do we know what wisdom is?
Well, that's true.
Right? And so that's where, call it Christian nationalism or whatever, the hot button word in the circles that I run in is theonomy, which just means God's law. And so literally no one advocates just taking the law from the first 5 books of the Bible and then just plopping it on to the United States or wherever and saying, there you go. What we do is take what's called the general equity of it, and then we apply it to our modern society, right? And so, for instance, in the law, it forbids taking a millstone as pledge in a loan, right? As collateral for a loan. If you can't pay me back this loan, then I'll take your millstone. Well, why? Because that's literally how he eats, right? And so I think personally, you can disagree, the general equity of that would be something along the lines of banning title loans. Because how do you get anywhere now is with your car. And I think that's predatory on people who are in a really bad spot. So that's just an example. The other examples would be stuff like laws against murder, theft. How do we apply penalties to those who commit that? How do we restore the victim? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I know that somebody is going to say, well, the Old Testament law doesn't apply to us. However, if you look at Leviticus 18:28, God had Israel drive nations out who had violated his law.
Yeah.
They were sacrificing children. They were worshiping other gods. They were doing just all kinds of horrific stuff when you really dig into it. And he's like, yeah, the land is spewing them out because of these things. Make sure you don't do those things too.
Yeah.
So if it applies to those pagan nations, how much more does it apply now that we have Jesus on the throne?
Yeah. Well, and I hear you talk like that, and to me, I think that there's a way in which to think about Christian nationalism that leads to a bigger and bigger government. But there's also a way, and I think
which I would be totally against.
You would be totally against, because what you're talking about, if it's going to work, requires a smaller and smaller government.
Yes.
I think a democratic republic is the best option for human government on this side of the resurrected state.
Yeah.
I think there's something in every human being that longs for a king.
Right.
We long for a king that we can trust.
Just like I've been chewing on some stuff lately in regards to like the globalist tendencies of some where you're trying to make a global government. Well, it's just a perversion of how Jesus rules the world.
That's exactly right.
Same thing with anti-Semitism. They hate Jews because a Jew runs the world.
Right. And so if
it's all a response against Jesus.
Exactly. And so if Christians aren't sober-minded about, okay, the Republicans are in power now, and there's a guy in the Oval Office who, is how do we describe him? He's like a.
How do you describe?
I don't know how you describe him. He's the first politician in my lifetime that you really don't have to wonder what he's thinking.
Yeah.
And maybe there are certainly times when I wish I didn't know what he was thinking.
Right.
But I'm also appreciative of the fact that, we know what he's thinking.
And the fact that there
degree.
are so many evangelicals in that cabinet and in the White House, right? Like the contrast between, I saw a contrast where it mashed up the response to Charlie Kirk's assassination with that funeral. And, it just runs through Marco Rubio and J.D. Vance and all these other, Pete Hegseth, Jesus is king and he's coming back and whatever. As opposed to the prayer service that happened immediately after 9/11 in the National Cathedral. You had a Muslim imam, you had an Episcopalian lady priest, and it was just a mess. It's like, why would you do a joint prayer service with people who worship demons? Like, that's not how any of that should work, right? And so if Christian nationalism means that when something like that happens and there's calls to prayer to the triune God, that's sign me up, right? That's a good thing.
Well, and is the danger here, though, really our tendency to build idols? I mean, idolatry.
Oh, of course.
Idolatry in its essence is, replacing Christ with some other king.
Right.
And if, Donald Trump and all the evangelicals in his cabinet become our hope, then, and the government continues to, like, it seems like the right has advocated for smaller government throughout its history. And is there concern that the right would actually come in a different door, but still be advocating for a bigger government?
Right. And I would totally argue against that. I think there's
Obviously
also...
we would. I guess I'm asking do we see that happening?
Maybe.
In
some ways, maybe. At the same time, like, there's always pendulum swings, right? And so there's pendulums to only seize power just for the sake of taking power because we can't win an argument. There's also one of the greatest fears of Christians in the West is persecution. But it's also one of the greatest desires of Christians in the West because we get so little of it. So some of our brothers who would advocate the third wayism, they're trying to get more toward being persecuted and ostracized somehow. Like that ratchet only turns left governmentally. And so there's somewhere properly third way, not the actual third way Russell Moore types, between this hard right Franco and between this third way that's, I think, properly conservative, limited government. Are you familiar with James Lindsay? He's an atheist political commentator. He used to be very, very liberal, and he's become more conservative. And he was actually part of a really funny controversy where he and some other people put together a bunch of fake scientific papers loaded with woke language and stuff like that. Said, oh yeah, these are totally peer reviewed, and got him thousands of these articles published. And they were all fake studies. So that was part of his controversy. But he tweeted, approximately 75% of the foundational law in the United States at its founding was drawn directly from the Hebrew Bible, which represented a unique departure from basically every other system in antiquity. Christianity is also based on it and represents 75 to 80% of the cultural foundation. Greece played a role, as did Rome, neither trivial, and even back to Aquinas and Augustine, but the greatest pillar of the ethical system was derived from Christian roots. Like, he even recognizes that. And when you just get to those principles, and we did not do it perfectly at the founding, but when you get to those principles, what happens is people flourish. When it's the government has its role, the family has its role, and the church has its role, things work out better.
And you know what I find myself not wanting to be, but struggling to not be?
Sure.
It's just skeptical.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to be skeptical.
Like
when I see young people turning to faith, on college campuses. I don't want to be skeptical about conservative values perhaps becoming more and more popular.
Yep.
I don't want to be skeptical about these things. I want to be hopeful, and I think I struggle because I know that regardless of how many Christians take office in Washington, we're still going to have a very imperfect government.
Of course.
Because those people are imperfect.
Yep.
The ones who are truly saved are still going to fight temptations to take matters into their own hands.
Yep.
And I think one of the things that's lacking in government, both sides of the aisle, is humility.
Oh, yeah.
It's just the humility to say that the government is not the end all be all of anything.
This is why C.S. Lewis said that the first requirement to run a country should be the desire to not run the country. We should just find somebody who doesn't want to do it and force him to do it, because he would actually not have an ego about it.
And I think that's part of why there's been so much hype around Trump, is that, and it may or may not be true to some degree. I don't know, that he didn't really want all of this, that he didn't have to go after all of this, but he feels some sense of calling towards it. I don't know.
Maybe.
I'm skeptical about that, because the way he postures himself, it seems like an ego trip a lot of the time. Although I love a lot of what he's done.
Yeah, recognizing he's done a lot of good. I think, you mentioned these young people turning to Christ in seemingly droves. I think there's a contrast. So Deuteronomy 4, God says, hey, obey the law, so keep and do them, for that is your wisdom and your understanding in the sight of the peoples who will hear all these statutes and say, surely this great nation is a wise and understanding people. For what great nation is there that has a God so near to it as the Lord our God whenever we called him? So you see Christians acting like Christians, and you're attracted to that.
Yeah.
But also Proverbs 12:10, we hear repeatedly, the compassion of the wicked is cruel. So when you have secular progressives advocating for very, very short prison sentences for rapists and whatnot, like that is actually cruelty. But the contrast, I had never seen this until like 3 weeks ago. It's contrasted to a righteous man has regard for the life of his animal. So the righteous Christians think so highly of God's creation that we're even kind to animals, like properly kind to animals. But what do the wicked do? They think they're being compassionate, and they're actually just making a bigger mess. And so that's where we have such an opportunity to make that contrast of I've been calling it an apologetic of beauty. Look at this family. Isn't that beautiful? Why is that? It's because God has set it up that way.
Yeah.
That's all they're doing. They're just living out their faith, as opposed to the green-haired, the bangs cut 1.5 inches long kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's everybody knows it's not beautiful, and everybody knows their life is a wreck because they're living in rebellion against God, and that never works out.
Have you watched this new series that's come out called The House of David?
Mm-mm.
You haven't watched it?
I've heard a little. I'll tell you about a thing I've heard about it later, but I've heard about some of it. Yes.
Okay. So we've watched it.
Okay.
And a new season came out, which I think there's only 2 episodes out, and it's right after David kills Goliath. And this is obviously, like, I think people know where I stand on The Chosen. I think The Chosen can be consumed in a good way without turning it into something that it's not.
With discernment.
And all that. And I think The House of David is the same way.
Okay.
There's a lot of extra biblical, at least what I've seen, a lot of extra biblical stuff.
Right.
But it's not the Bible. I'm not treating it as the Bible.
Right.
But it like any movie, because I think was it J.R. Tolkien that said, there's a hint of truth in all our fairy stories?
Yep.
So even if an artist takes, a biblical story and turns it into a movie or a play or whatever, and, goes outside the biblical bounds, and it becomes, in some ways a fictional, even though there are parts of it that are nonfiction. In the House of David, you have the prophet Samuel. okay, and they have dramatized the Lord rejecting Saul.
Does it have a scene of Saul being installed as king, like them rejecting God, and then
There was a flashback.
Okay,
there was a flashback, and but by this point, God has rejected Saul.
Mm-hmm.
Samuel has told him that he's gone through, all of the emotional, spiritual stuff that is somewhat described in the Bible, that he was tormented. And, David's playing of the harp comforted him.
Mm-hmm.
So they dramatized all of that.
Yep.
And it probably, exaggerated a lot of it, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But regardless, after David kills Goliath, Saul kind of snaps out of his craziness in the story. Like he's been like at times in the bed, completely out of his mind.
Mm-hmm.
And his family doesn't know what to do. The nation doesn't know what to do. But David kills Goliath, and he kind of snaps out of it. And then, as is described in the Bible, there's a great victory of God's people over the Philistines when Goliath is killed.
Mm-hmm.
And so after that, Saul's like, okay, well, I'm back in God's good graces now. But the rumors have circulated that Samuel has anointed another to take the throne.
Mm-hmm.
So Saul comes and finds, spoiler alert a little bit. I'm not telling the whole thing, but Saul comes and finds Samuel, who in this series, I mean, I have to be careful how I say this, but Samuel is an absolute bad A. Like, I absolutely love it.
You could have said that uncensored on the Westminster Effects podcast.
Yeah, but this is the real podcast. Please don't be offended at me, but it is just like, I love Samuel's character in this story.
Sure. I might have to go watch this.
But anyway, Saul finds Samuel and comes to Samuel, who's, out in the wilderness somewhere. And he's like, Samuel, we had this great victory. God has, I forget his exact words, but basically, I'm back. I've snapped out. The darkness has left me. I'm back. And I want you to anoint me again in front of the people. Because again, the rumors have circulated that Samuel's anointed another.
Mm-hmm. That sounds on brand. Like even though we don't have
it seems somewhat plausible.
Right.
I want you to anoint me again in front of the people. Because Saul's trying to protect his position as king, which is a lot like what our current politicians do.
Yep.
To put it mildly.
Yep.
They want to protect their position. They want to keep their power.
Yep.
So much of American politics is just about being in power.
Yep.
And Samuel looks back at him and says, no, the Lord hasn't commanded it.
Yep.
And Saul basically goes, but I'm king. And I'm telling you, anoint me again in front of the people. And Samuel looks back at him and goes, I don't serve you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't serve you. The prophet looks at the king and says, I don't serve you. And you fill in the blank. I serve the living God. And I think that to me stands out because I feel like, is it possible that the waters could get muddy to the point that Christians forget who serves who?
Yep.
The government is meant to serve God.
Yep.
And his kingdom.
Yep.
By doing what primarily? Yes, defending morality. Yes, restraining evil and bringing justice, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also staying out of the way of the church.
Yep.
And keeping its grubby hands off the church.
Yep.
And that to me is, if we are going to be a Christian nation, that's the only way that it's going to happen.
Exactly. 2 quotes to cap us off. Some people will think that this is new. Mm-hmm. It's not at all. One, the Puritans agreed with everything that we said and would go a little bit farther even. Mm-hmm. But Irenaeus in 180, it is not Satan who has appointed the kingdoms of this world, but God. And the word says by Solomon, by me, kings reign and princes administer justice. Mm. So even in 180, 225, Origen, and this is granting the problems with Origen. There's a bunch of them, but he nails it here. Christ also restored the laws of rulership and government that had been corrupted. There are some that think that all of the world's systems are irredeemable, right? So Christ has restored the laws of rulership and government that had been corrupted. By subduing all enemies under his feet, he might teach rulers themselves moderation in their government. So, quoting 1 Corinthians 15, saying, hey, he's putting all of his enemies under his feet, and while he's doing that, he's actually teaching rulers his standards.
Yeah.
And that's almost 2,000 years ago.
Well, I guess my encouragement would be, don't hear me say be unpatriotic. Don't hear me say don't love America. But love it so much less than Christ's kingdom that it looks like hate.
Yeah. Yeah.
Pray for leaders that they will do exactly what God intends them to do, because that is the means by which God will accomplish his purpose through both pagan and believing leaders. And pray that the government keeps its grubby hands off the church.
Yeah. And when you say love it so much less than the kingdom that it looks like hate, you're not saying to not love it. You actually love it the best when it's in that proper
Exactly
hierarchy.
Right. It's exactly
just
right.
like your family, right? Like Jesus applied that directly to the family. You actually love them the best when it's in that proper
Well, it's like
place.
I said on Sunday, we were in John 13, and Jesus gives this, very famous command. He says, love one another as I have loved you, and by this all men will know you're my disciples, by the way you love one another. And my statement was, don't homogenize the love that we have for the brethren with the love that we show to the world. The best way we can love the world, like Jesus' command to love one another is not a command to love the world less, it's to love each other more.
Right.
And the best way we can love the world is to actually love each other, those who belong to the family of God, the way that Christ called us to, because it puts his glory on display, which is the best way we can love the world. So the best way we can love our country is to long for Christ and his kingdom all the more. And for us to long for his kingdom to advance in America and around the world.
And when that happens, good things happen.
Exactly.
The nation is blessed by the kingdom advancing. So you seek one first. Oh, that sounds familiar.
All these things will be added, which, we're going to have to, along the way, we're going to have to that's not the right thing. We're going to have to reject the temptation to build idols. Out of politics and politicians. We're going to have to be careful with that. And so may the gospel go forth, and may we think soberly about government, and rightly and biblically about government, and
be bold in talking to our representatives about who they answer to.
Yeah,
I always get the best responses when I'm more blunt about that with them.
Yeah, about who they answer to.
Yeah,
Exactly. All right. Well, we'll leave it there. There's probably a lot more to say, but thanks for joining us, letting us wrestle with this. It's definitely something that I think we're all trying to find that right category of thought for everything that's happening. And so we pray that the Lord will help us in all this.
Amen and amen.
Thanks for joining us.